427 to 1. President Donald Trump has already signaled that he will sign the bill once it gets to his desk, but it remains uncertain if federal prosecutors will unveil any documents shedding new light on Epstein's relationship with Trump, who claims he broke ties with the financier long ago.
On this vote, the yeas are 427, the nays are 1. 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed.
All but one member of the House signed off on a bill that just months ago seemed like a pipe dream. But persistent pressure from within the Republican Party and the public changed the equation. Jeffrey Epstein was convicted on prostitution charges in 2008, before being charged with sex trafficking minors in 2019. Later that year, he killed himself in prison while awaiting trial. While there are questions about the source of his wealth and how he managed to abuse so many girls for so long, conspiracy theories focus on the late financier's death and speculate if one of his powerful former friends ordered his killing. The bill would require the US Justice Department to release all files and communications related to Jeffrey Epstein within 30 days, as well as details from the investigation into his death.
I want everybody to take a look. I know everybody sees us today as grown adults, but we are fighting for the children that were abandoned and left behind in the reckoning. This is who you're fighting for. This is who Congress is fighting for. This is who the House of Representatives are fighting for, and hopefully the Senate will fight for us too.
The last step before the bill can become law is the signature of the president himself, who reaffirmed that he had no relationship with Epstein.
Mr. President, why wait for Congress to release the Epstein Files? Why not just do it now?
You know, as far as the Epstein Files is...
Okay, so November 19th, 2025, just delivered one of the most stunning political beatdowns in modern American history. And if you haven't heard about this yet, buckle up because this is absolutely wild. Congress just crushed President Trump, and I mean absolutely demolished him, on the Epstein Files bill. We're talking 427 to 1 in the House. That's not a typo. 427 to 1. And then the Senate, they passed it unanimously. Not a single dissenting vote. This is the kind of bipartisan cooperation that literally never happens in Washington anymore. And it happened specifically to go against Trump's wishes. Can you believe this? And here's where it gets even more insane. Trump's reaction? He reportedly stormed out of closed-door meetings when the vote results came through, just walked out, left the room. The White House is now in full damage control mode, trying to manage what political analysts are calling one of the most humiliating rebukes any president has faced from their own party in decades. Because let's be clear, this wasn't just Democrats voting against him. This was Republicans, his own party, his own allies, joining together in a massive show of defiance to force the release of every single government document related to Jeffrey Epstein. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
The Trump people and the Trump Justice Department decided to open an investigation just a few days ago into, quote, Democrats who were involved in the Epstein activities. And what that does is it freezes some documents. They can't be released as long as an investigation is underway. So we'll see how much we actually get. We'll see whether all the documents are still there. We'll never know for sure, as we have in so many other federal investigations. Things disappear, they're misplaced. It's really remarkable. But this is a tremendous turnaround for Donald Trump. He was forced to give in because he was going to be embarrassed. He was going to lose by a wide margin, including in his own party, which he has controlled tightly since he got into his second term.
Well, before we get into more details about what we're actually going to see. Let's talk about the political question, because as you said, this was a big reversal. President Trump had the power to release the files all along. So this passing of the bill almost unanimously in both houses of Congress is really about Congress trying to force Trump to do something that he doesn't want to do, isn't it?
Think about what that vote margin actually means for a second. 427 to 1. That means nearly every single member of the House, Democrats and Republicans alike, voted to override Trump's position. The only person who voted no was Republican Representative Clay Higgins from Louisiana. One guy out of 428 votes cast. That's a 99.8% majority against Trump's original stance. In today's hyper-partisan political environment, where Congress can barely agree on what day it is, they managed to find near-perfect unity specifically to go against the president. That's not just a loss. That's a complete and total rejection. And the Senate didn't just pass it. They did it by unanimous consent. That means not a single senator objected. Not one. Republicans, who usually fall in line behind Trump, they voted yes. Democrats, who Trump's been attacking for years, obviously voted yes. Moderate Republicans who've been on the fence about various Trump policies, yes. MAGA loyalists who defend Trump no matter what, even they voted yes. When was the last time you saw the Senate agree unanimously on anything controversial? This basically never happens. But it happened yesterday specifically to force transparency on the Epstein Files, despite Trump's attempts to stall or water down the release. Now here's the thing. Trump actually reversed his opposition at the last minute. He saw the writing on the wall. His team realized they were about to get steamrolled, so they tried to flip and claim they supported transparency all along. But it was too late. The damage was done, and more importantly, everyone knew what had really happened. For months, the White House had been working behind the scenes to delay this vote, to add amendments that would limit what got released, to find any possible way to keep these documents from going public. Political insiders were reporting closed-door pressure campaigns, threats to primary GOP members who supported the bill, all the usual Trump tactics. None of it worked. So when the votes came through, and it became crystal clear that Trump had lost in the most spectacular fashion possible, he apparently couldn't handle it. Multiple sources say he stormed out of meetings, lashing out at advisors, blaming everyone around him for this disaster. And then came the social media posts. Trump immediately went online, blaming traitors and the deep state for pushing the files release. He's pointing fingers at everyone except himself, trying to spin this massive defeat as somehow being everyone else's fault. But here's the reality. This was a failure of Trump's political power. This was Congress, including his own party, saying, "We don't care what you want, we're doing this anyway." The bill itself is straightforward, but devastating for anyone who wants to keep secrets. It mandates that the Department of Justice and Attorney General Pam Bondi, who Trump appointed, by the way, must release all Epstein-related government documents within 30 days. Not some of them, not redacted versions, all of them. Full public disclosure. Everything the government has been sitting on about Jeffrey Epstein's connections, his associates, his activities, the people who were involved in his circle, it's all coming out. And you better believe there are some very nervous people in Washington right now, on both sides of the aisle, wondering if their names are going to show up in those files. Political commentators are calling this a watershed moment. Not just because of what's in the files, though that's obviously huge, but because of what this vote represents. This is a rare moment where Congress actually functioned the way it's supposed to. Democrats and Republicans coming together, putting aside partisan warfare, and saying that transparency and accountability matter more than protecting powerful people. That's remarkable. That's the kind of thing that gives people hope that maybe the system can still work when it really matters. But from Trump's perspective, this is a nightmare. Because this vote exposes something he desperately doesn't want exposed. That his grip on the Republican Party is weakening. That his ability to control Congress is slipping. That even his own allies will abandon him when the political pressure gets intense enough. A 427 to 1 vote isn't just a loss, it's a humiliation. It's a public demonstration that Trump couldn't keep his own party in line on an issue he clearly cared about. And in politics, once that weakness shows, once people realize you can be defeated, it becomes a lot harder to intimidate or control them going forward. So what exactly led to this historic rebuke? Why did Republicans abandon Trump on this specific issue? What's actually in these Epstein files that has so many people terrified? And what does this mean for Trump's presidency going forward when he can't even count on his own party to back him up? That's what we're breaking down today. Because November 19th wasn't just about releasing documents. It was about power, control, and the beginning of what might be the end of Trump's ability to dominate Washington the way he used to. All right, so let's actually dig into how we got to this point, because the story behind this vote is almost as wild as the vote itself. To understand why Congress just handed Trump this massive defeat, You need to understand what's been happening behind the scenes for months now. The push to release the Epstein Files didn't start yesterday. This has been building for a long time, with activists, survivors, journalists, and even some members of Congress demanding transparency about what the government knows regarding Jeffrey Epstein's network and the powerful people connected to him. For years, there have been calls to release these documents. For years, both Democratic and Republican administrations have found reasons to keep them classified or restricted. National security concerns, privacy issues, ongoing investigations. There's always been an excuse, but something shifted recently. Public pressure reached a breaking point. More and more people started asking why these files were still secret when Epstein himself is dead and Ghislaine Maxwell is already in prison. What exactly is the government protecting at this point? Who are they shielding? And why should the public continue to be kept in the dark about potential criminal behavior by wealthy and powerful individuals? Those questions became impossible to ignore, especially as both left-wing and right-wing media started focusing on the issue. When you have Tucker Carlson and AOC basically agreeing that these files need to come out, you know something has changed in the political atmosphere. So members of Congress, responding to their constituents and recognizing the political winds, started pushing for legislation that would force the release. The bill that eventually passed, the Epstein Files Transparency Act, is pretty simple in its core requirement. It says the Department of Justice has to release all government documents related to Jeffrey Epstein's activities, associations, and network within 30 days of the bill becoming law. No more delays, no more excuses, no more protecting powerful people who might be embarrassed or implicated by what's in those files. Just release everything and let the American people see what their government has been hiding. Now here's where Trump comes into the story. Initially, the White House was absolutely opposed to this bill. Not publicly at first. They were smart enough to know that coming out strongly against transparency would look terrible. But behind the scenes, Trump's team was working overtime to kill this legislation before it could gain momentum. They were lobbying Republicans to vote no, or at least to delay the vote. They were pushing for amendments that would add so many restrictions and redactions that the bill would be meaningless. They were arguing that releasing these files could compromise national security, damage diplomatic relationships, violate privacy rights, all the standard objections that get used whenever the government wants to keep secrets. And look, maybe some of those concerns were legitimate. But the problem is that after years of secrecy, people don't trust those arguments anymore. The public has heard, "Trust us, we can't release this for your own good" too many times. So when the White House started making those same arguments about the Epstein files, members of Congress, even Republican members, started getting phone calls and emails from constituents saying, "We don't care about your excuses, release the files." The political pressure became overwhelming. Representative Thomas Massie from Kentucky, who's a Republican and generally Trump-friendly, gave a statement in the hallway after the vote that really captures what happened. He said many Republicans were relieved that President Trump finally backed the release and that people want the truth. That word "relieved" tells you everything. Republican members of Congress were relieved that Trump eventually flipped his position because they didn't want to have to vote against him, but they were going to do it anyway because the political cost of opposing transparency had become too high. They were in an impossible position, loyalty to Trump versus doing what their constituents were demanding, and in this case, the constituents won. So Trump, realizing he was about to suffer a humiliating defeat, made a last-minute reversal. His team put out statements saying he actually supported releasing the files, that he wanted transparency, that he'd been pushing for this all along. Nobody bought it. Everyone in Washington knew what had really been happening. Everyone knew about the months of behind-the-scenes opposition. The reversal fooled nobody. It just made Trump look weak and indecisive. If you're going to oppose something, at least have the courage to stick with your position. Flip-flopping at the last second, just to avoid an even worse political outcome, makes you look like you're panicking. And then came the vote. When the House started tallying the results, and it became clear that the margin was going to be absolutely massive, Trump reportedly lost it. According to multiple sources with knowledge of what happened inside the White House, he was watching the vote in real time, probably expecting at least some significant Republican opposition that would give him cover. But as the numbers came in, 100 yes votes, then 200, then 300, then 400, and only one no vote from Clay Higgins, Trump apparently couldn't stay in the room anymore. He stormed out of the meetings where his staff was gathered, started yelling at advisors about betrayal, about how his own party had stabbed him in the back, about how this was all a setup by the deep state to embarrass him. The Senate vote made it even worse. At least in the House, you had one guy, Clay Higgins, who voted no and gave Trump something to point to. But the Senate, unanimous consent, not a single objection. That means Mitch McConnell voted yes. That means every MAGA Republican in the Senate voted yes. That means even the most Trump-loyal senators decided that on this issue, they couldn't back him up. The symbolism of that unanimous Senate vote is devastating for Trump. It's a public demonstration that when push comes to shove, when the political pressure gets intense enough, even his closest allies will abandon him to save themselves. Now let's talk about what's actually at stake here. Why did Trump care so much about stopping this release? There are a few possible explanations. The most charitable interpretation is that he genuinely believed releasing the files could cause diplomatic problems or privacy violations, and he was trying to be a responsible president, protecting legitimate government interests. But let's be real, nobody believes that's the actual reason. Trump's not known for carefully weighing complex policy considerations about transparency versus national security. He makes decisions based on loyalty, power, and self-interest. The more likely explanation is that Trump knows or suspects that releasing these files is going to embarrass people he knows, people he's worked with, maybe even himself. Remember, Trump was photographed with Epstein multiple times back in the day. They moved in the same social circles in New York and Palm Beach for years. Now, being photographed with someone doesn't make you guilty of their crimes. Lots of people knew Epstein before his activities became fully public. But Trump's probably worried about how those old connections will look once everything comes out. He's probably worried about what Epstein might have said about him in interviews or documents. He's probably worried that even if there's nothing directly incriminating, the optics of his name appearing throughout the files will damage him politically. But it's bigger than just Trump. There are likely dozens or even hundreds of powerful people, politicians, business leaders, celebrities, foreign officials who are absolutely terrified about what's in these documents. Some of them might be directly implicated in criminal activity. Others might just be embarrassed by associations or activities that, while not illegal, don't look good. This creates a situation where lots of powerful people had a vested interest in keeping these files secret, and they were probably all applying pressure on Congress to kill this bill. But the public demand for transparency was so strong that even all that elite pressure couldn't stop it. The vote also reveals something important about where Congress is right now. For years, we've watched as the Republican Party basically became the Trump Party. He controlled the agenda. He controlled who got supported in primaries. He controlled how members voted on major issues. If Trump wanted something, Republicans in Congress generally gave it to him. If Trump opposed something, they killed it. That's how it's worked since 2016. But this vote shows that dynamic might be changing. When the political cost of supporting Trump becomes higher than the political cost of opposing him, even his own party will turn on him. And that's exactly what happened here. Republican members looked at their polling, listened to their constituents, and decided that transparency on Epstein was more important than loyalty to Trump. This is a crack in Trump's political power, and cracks have a way of spreading. Once other members of Congress see that you can oppose Trump and survive, or even benefit politically from opposing him, they're more likely to do it again on future issues. Once Trump's aura of invincibility gets punctured, once people realize he can be beaten, his ability to intimidate and control people diminishes. That's what makes November 19th so significant beyond just the Epstein files themselves. This vote might be remembered as the moment when Trump's grip on Washington started to slip. The immediate aftermath has been chaotic. Trump's been posting constantly on social media, attacking the vote, attacking specific members of Congress, claiming he was betrayed, insisting he actually wanted the files released all along. His messaging is all over the place because he's trying to spin an unspinnable situation. You can't lose 427-1 and then pretend it was actually a victory. You can't get unanimously defeated in the Senate and claim you were in control the whole time. The facts are too clear. The numbers are too overwhelming. No amount of spin can change what happened. Meanwhile, Attorney General Pam Bondi now has to figure out how to actually implement this law. She's got 30 days to compile and release all the Epstein-related documents in the government's possession. That's a massive undertaking. There are probably thousands of pages of material, FBI files, testimony transcripts, financial records, photographs, correspondence, interview notes, everything the government collected during its investigations into Epstein. All of it has to be reviewed, organized, and released. And you better believe Bondi's under enormous pressure from all sides, from the public demanding transparency, from Trump wanting to limit what gets out, from other powerful people who are probably calling her, nonstop begging her to redact or withhold information that might implicate them. This is going to be messy. This is going to be controversial. And this is going to dominate headlines for weeks or months as the documents start coming out and journalists start digging through them, looking for new revelations. November 19th was just the beginning of this story. The real fireworks haven't even started yet. So now let's break down what all of this actually means going forward, because the implications of this vote go way beyond just the Epstein files themselves. We're looking at a fundamental shift in American politics and Trump's ability to govern effectively. First, let's talk about what happens when these documents actually get released. We're probably looking at one of the biggest document dumps in recent political history. Everything the government knows about Jeffrey Epstein's network, his activities, his associates, the people who were connected to him, it's all going to become public within the next month. And you can bet that journalists and researchers are already preparing to go through every single page looking for newsworthy revelations. Some of what comes out might be stuff we already knew or suspected. Epstein's relationship with certain high-profile people has been reported on extensively, but there's almost certainly new information in these files that hasn't been public before, names that haven't been connected to Epstein previously, details about his operations that fill in gaps in the public's understanding, financial transactions that show how money flowed through his network, testimony from victims that provides new perspectives on what was happening. Every single day after these files get released, we're probably going to see new headlines as people discover fresh information in the documents. And here's what makes this politically explosive. It's bipartisan. The Epstein network included people from across the political spectrum, Democrats and Republicans, business leaders from different industries, international figures from multiple countries. When these files come out, nobody's side is going to look good. There are going to be embarrassing revelations about people on the left and people on the right. That's probably part of why Congress was willing to pass this bill so overwhelmingly. Everyone knows their own side is going to take some hits, but they also know the other side will too. So it feels fair in a weird way. For Trump specifically, the release creates multiple problems. First, there's whatever might be in the documents about him personally. Even if it's nothing criminal or even particularly damaging, the mere fact that his name appears in Epstein-related files is going to generate headlines and give his opponents ammunition. They're going to take any mention of Trump in these documents and blow it up into the biggest story possible. Whether that's fair or not is almost beside the point. It's what's going to happen. Second, this loss in Congress damages Trump's political standing, regardless of what's in the files. When you lose a vote, 427 to 1, when your own party abandons you on a major issue, that sends a signal to everyone in Washington that you're vulnerable. Future legislative battles become harder because members of Congress now know they can oppose you without necessarily suffering consequences. Your ability to cut deals diminishes because people don't fear you as much anymore. Your political capital depletes. And once that process starts, it's really hard to reverse. Trump's going to spend the next few months trying to reassert dominance, trying to punish the Republicans who voted against him, trying to prove he's still in control. But the reality is that November 19th changed the dynamic. Third, this creates a blueprint for how to defeat Trump politically. The lesson other politicians are learning from this vote is that if you can build enough public pressure on an issue, if you can make opposing transparency or accountability politically toxic, then even Trump's allies will abandon him. That's a powerful lesson that's going to get applied to future battles. Want to pass legislation Trump opposes? Build a massive public pressure campaign around it? Want to force Trump to back down on something? Make his position politically untenable with his own base? The 427 to 1 vote proved this strategy can work. Now let's talk about the 2026 implications. The midterm elections are coming up, and you better believe both parties are already thinking about how to use this vote in their campaigns. Democrats are going to hammer every single Republican who they claim didn't push hard enough for transparency, even though nearly all Republicans ultimately voted yes. They're going to use the fact that Trump initially opposed the release as evidence of a cover-up mentality. They're going to point to his storming out of meetings as evidence of instability. They've got a lot of material to work with here. Republicans, meanwhile, are in a tough spot. The ones who voted yes, which is almost all of them, can defend themselves by saying they stood up for transparency and accountability. But they're also going to have to deal with Trump's anger. He's probably already making a list of who to primary, who to withhold support from, who to punish for this betrayal. Republican members of Congress are caught between doing what their constituents wanted and dealing with Trump's wrath. Some of them are going to decide it's worth standing up to him. Others are going to try to find ways to get back in his good graces. It's going to create divisions within the party. Independent voters are watching all of this and drawing their own conclusions. And for a lot of independents, this vote is probably going to look like a good thing. Congress actually worked together to demand transparency and hold powerful people accountable. That's the kind of thing voters say they want to see more of. So in a weird way, this loss for Trump might actually boost Congress's approval rating, even while it damages Trump personally. Voters like seeing their elected representatives stand up to the president when they think it's the right thing to do. The elite accountability angle here is huge. For decades, there's been this sense that wealthy and powerful people play by different rules. that they can engage in behavior that would land regular people in prison and face no real consequences. The Epstein case has been Exhibit A for this dynamic. A guy who was clearly connected to dozens or hundreds of powerful people, who engaged in horrible criminal behavior for years, and who somehow managed to get sweetheart plea deals and maintain his lifestyle and connections until very late in his life. And even after his death and Maxwell's conviction, the sense that the full story hasn't come out has been overwhelming. This vote and the resulting document release represents a rare moment where the system might actually deliver some accountability, not necessarily criminal accountability for everyone involved. The statute of limitations has probably run out on many potential charges, but at minimum, public accountability, transparency, the truth coming out about who knew what and when, about who was involved in Epstein's network, about how he maintained his operations for so long, that's valuable, even if it doesn't result in new prosecutions. It tells the public what actually happened, it names names, it exposes the machinery of elite impunity, and that has implications beyond just Epstein. If this document release leads to genuine public reckoning with how the powerful protected one of their own for so long, that could create momentum for similar transparency in other areas. Why are we still keeping so many government documents classified decades after the events they describe? Why do we allow powerful people to hide behind privacy claims when there's legitimate public interest in their behavior? Why does it take massive public pressure campaigns and near-unanimous congressional votes to get basic transparency? The Epstein case could be a catalyst for broader reforms in how we handle government secrecy and elite accountability, but we also have to be realistic about the limits here. Documents getting released doesn't necessarily mean justice gets done. Some of the people named in these files might face legal consequences if the evidence is strong enough and the statute of limitations hasn't expired, but many others will probably just face public embarrassment and then move on with their lives. Rich people have armies of lawyers and PR professionals who specialize in damage control. They'll put out statements expressing shock and regret. They'll claim they had no idea what Epstein was really up to. They'll minimize their connections to him, and in many cases, they'll weather the storm and come out the other side with their power and wealth largely intact. That's frustrating, but probably inevitable. The system we have isn't great at holding powerful people accountable, even when we have clear evidence of wrongdoing. Money buys legal defense, media spin, political connections, all the things that help people escape consequences. So we should be excited about the transparency this vote represents, while also being clear-eyed about its limitations. Some accountability is better than none, but it's probably not going to be as complete or satisfying as we might hope. The Trump angle adds another layer to all of this. His loss on this vote might be remembered as a turning point in his presidency, the moment when his grip on power started to weaken, the moment when even his own party said no, the moment when bipartisan cooperation returned to Washington specifically to overrule him. That's historically significant, regardless of what happens with the Epstein Files themselves. Where does all this leave us? We're about to see the biggest transparency dump on elite behavior in years. Trump just suffered one of the most lopsided congressional defeats any president has ever faced. The 2026 midterms just got a lot more interesting, and American politics just entered a new phase where Trump's control over his own party is no longer absolute. November 19th was a genuine turning point. The aftermath is going to be wild, and we're all going to be watching closely as those documents start coming out and the real revelations begin.